What's up YouTube, this is Demkeys back again with another Unity tutorial. Today we will learn about triggers. Triggers work in a similar way to uh, colliders, only in the case of triggers you don't actually collide, you enter the trigger, thereby triggering some kind of action. What action? That is up to you. Let's see an example. Okay, here I have created a background and a ground object as well. Let me add the material. Yeah, so this is the ground object and I'm going to add a box collider 2D. So this is what our player and even the other object that we'll control uh, is going to stand on. Sorry, are going to stand on? Yeah, this is what the player and the other object are going to stand on. Now let's create our player. Before we continue, I have created these materials over here. Trigger material is not really necessary, but just for the sake of differentiating, I created a trigger material. You can use the same ground material as well. Doesn't really make a difference. Yeah, let's begin. So this is our player. I'm going to add a red material to it and remove this mesh collider and add a rigid body 2D and a box collider 2D. Also, I am going to keep the gravity scale 0 because well, in this example my trigger objects are going to be in the air. What next? The enemy. Yes. Well, it's not exactly an enemy, but I'm just calling it an enemy. I'll set the gravity for this to 1 because I'll be using add force to make the enemy jump, and I'll be using fixed angle for both of these objects because if the enemy jumps and comes towards the player and if they both collide, we don't want them spinning out of control. So, oh yes, the enemy material. Okay, now I will create the triggers. Okay, so what I've done here is I have added a box collider 2D to, sorry, I've created two quad objects. I've added box collider 2D component to both of them, and notice in under the box collider 2D there's an option called is trigger. This is what defines whether the object can be collided with or whether it is some sort of trigger. If I uncheck this, then any object will be able to collide with it and it might have whatever effect. Maybe it might move this object or something like that. Basically the collision will take place. But if I use is trigger, my player, for example, is just going to go through it. The player is not going to actually hit it and move the object. You'll see now soon. Now we'll create the move script. Before we continue, I'm going to create two tags because I'll be needing this for one of the if statements in on trigger enter to the, oh yes, just like on collision enter, there is also on trigger enter, and also on trigger stay and on trigger exit. When you're making a 2D game, then you would add 2D at the end, so it would be on trigger enter 2D, on trigger stay 2D, and on trigger exit 2D. Also, these methods, rather than collision 2D, they take collider 2D. On collision enter would take on collision enter 2D would take collision 2D type of variable, but in on trigger enter 2D you would use collider 2D. So yeah, I'll name this trig1, and I'll create one more, name it trig2. I'll assign these tags. Yeah, now let's move on to the what the move script. Okay, first we need a move speed variable, which will be a public float, and we will also need a public game object named as target, and a public material named this also target. The reason why I am creating these variables, name this as target material. The reason why I'm creating these variables as public variables is because I will later drag our enemy object into this variable and the enemy's material into this. So in that way we can change whatever details we want through code much more easily. For now, let's just establish the movement. I'm sorry, I seem to have forgotten what I have to what I have to type here. Just a minute. Into h has to be x. Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. It happens sometimes. I just go blank. No, I don't think we need time dot delta time here. Do we? Let's see. As you can see, our target variable is here and target material is also here. Now let me set this speed and see if it works. Okay, something's wrong. Yeah, it's a very big jump. Okay, that's fine. Yep. So let's continue. Okay, now before we go back to the code, we need to tell our, in fact we don't need to do this right now. We can even do it later. You know what, we'll do it later. Let's move on to the code. Okay, so first we are going to use onTriggerEnter 2D. It takes a parameter of collider 2D type. Now what do we want this to do? Yes, we first want to check if trigger 1 has been pressed or trigger 2 has been pressed. Sorry, not pressed. If trigger 1 has been triggered or trigger 2 has been triggered. I don't know if triggered is the right word or not, but Yeah, you get the point. So I am going to find this out by reading their tags. Now what's going to happen is when our player enters when our player collides with either one of these objects, then on trigger enter 2D will be called, and the value of, or let's say the information of that object will be stored in call, so we can access it through call.gameObject.tag. In this case we are accessing the tag, but you can also access other things. So here we are going to check if it is trig1. I don't know if I've spelled that right or not. Check it later. Okay, so if it is on trig1, then we want our enemy to, let's say, jump to the left, actually jump to the left. So we'll add force on the x and the y axis. So for that we will, oh, don't forget our enemy object is going to be, or say, a reference. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but yes, when we type here target, we are actually talking about our enemy object, because we have stored, or we will store, the enemy object, and we'll store a reference to the enemy object over here in target. That is why we are able to access it. So we will access target's rigid body 2D component and tell it to use add force, new vector 2, let's try 20F and 60F. Oh no, it's supposed to jump to the left, so it should be minus. Here target dot, here the value will be positive because we want the object to jump towards the right. Let's see if this works. Before we run the game, we need to add a reference to our enemy object. To do that, you just click on the enemy. No, you don't click on it. You click and drag, or you could even click on this little circle over here and select whatever object you want. Let's try that with our target material. I need enemy material. There. So now let's run the game and see if it works. I'm first going to go to the left. Force is very less. I'll increase it on both. Let's give this 60 and this 200. Same here. See that? I have to apologize. I've actually set the colors very dull. Oh, that's better. I guess I should do that for all of them. Yep, even the trigger. There you go. Oh, good. It didn't revert back. Okay, so now you can see our enemy object being affected whenever we enter the triggers, either one of these triggers. Now this is on trigger enter 2D. Let's experiment with on trigger stay 2D. What would be a good example? Okay, okay. Now, what would be a good example? You know what? Let me comment out all this. I forgot what the shortcut was. Let me check. Okay. So for now, I have disabled our uh, on trigger enter 2D whatever I typed in there. I've just commented it, so none of that is going to take effect. What I'm going to do now is place this object in the air and set its gravity to 0. What I'm going to do is use transform.translate to demonstrate this effect. Target.transform.translate. Let's see if this works. Nope. Error. Oh, my bad. Forgot to use F. See? It works. Maybe I should lower the speed much more so you can see it properly. See that? As long as I'm in stay, it remains moving. The moment I step out, it's not, on trigger stay is not running anymore and the object stops. I could apply the same code that I applied in on trigger enter 2D, and instead of target.rigidbody 2D.add force, I could use target.transform.translate, and so our object would move. Oh, damn. Okay. Excuse me for not knowing these shortcuts, but I don't use them very often, so. Okay. So this should come under trigger 2, and here we should use the same thing but just add a negative value. Okay. There. As long as I'm within the trigger, as long as on trigger stay 2D is being called, the object will move, and depending upon which object I'm colliding with or triggering, I'm not sure what term to use, but yeah, depending on which object I'm colliding with, uh, the enemy object will move accordingly. Okay, so Now I will show you on trigger exit. For this we can use something as simple as changing the color. In fact, just so you can see the change, let's change the color of target material from here, because on trigger stay is going to be called before on trigger enter. No, sorry, before on trigger exit. So it'll be easier for you to understand the example. Let's use this color. And when on trigger exit is called, then we'll change the color of the material to say blue. Let's see if this works. See that? On trigger stay is being called, so it's this color, and the moment I exit, it becomes blue. Again, while on trigger stay is being called, this color is used. Once I exit, it becomes blue. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That is how you use triggers. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.